Hello and welcome to the ReConnect podcast, a weekly show sponsored by Anasazi Foundation and powered by Stiry. I'm your host, Ganel-Lyn, and the purpose of this podcast is to help you improve your life by strengthening your most important relationships and connecting to your truest self. Welcome to the ReConnect podcast, sponsored by the Anasazi Foundation and powered by Stiry. I'm Ganel-Lyn, your host, and I'm so excited to have my guest with us today, Dan Davis of Stiry.
So good to be here.
We're so happy you're here. The idea behind the ReConnect podcast is to really empower our listeners to reconnect. But what does connect really mean? And for us, here at the podcast, it's to join, link together, unite, and bind, and to establish communication, which is why I invited you here today. And there's so much in our life that disconnects us, right? That pulls us away, the bills, the to-do lists, even the good things in our lives can create disconnection, but we are wired for connection. So on the podcast, we really like to provide content that supports individuals and families to circle back. I love the word circle back because it invites us to practice and fail and then circle back and try again. I really love having you here because I'm a huge Dan fan.
Thank you. I'm a huge Ganel-Lyn fan.
I love the rhyming of all of that. But I really love your brilliance, the wheelhouse that you've established through Stiry, and I think your life experience has led you to this point, is your ability to tell stories, but to get people to tell their story to you. And that, I think, when we're talking about connection, especially in families, especially if you have teenagers, but I think in marriages, even in the workplace, to get people to share is really, in my soul, the place we find that connection. Why don't you share a little bit of your backstory and what brought you to the story making mission that you're on, and then we'll kind of go from there and give some takeaways to our listeners.
Absolutely. I mean, it is all about connection. My whole story, I felt as a young person very connected to a lot of people. I never had one group of friends. I was friends with every group.
I love that.
And through sports, through school, through church, all those things, I just felt like there was no one set of people that I identified with. I identified with a lot of people, and I don't think I like fully realized what that meant. You know,
what
obviously as a kid,
yeah.
But as I got into my adult years and was running different businesses and always been an entrepreneur, I found that that I wasn't connecting the way that I used to through business.
Interesting.
Like I said, I've always been an entrepreneur, and through business, I felt like I lost a little bit of that ability to connect with people because I was so focused on business and what I was supposed to be as a business owner.
The result, the output.
Yeah, and I loved business, but I realized, years and years. I mean, this is literally just a discovery a few years ago when I started Stiry. That
through a hard time, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I had several entrepreneur ventures, and some of them had worked and some of them hadn't, and felt like I lost my identity a little bit through that process. And that feeling of loss was actually not capitalizing on my ability to connect with people. That's what I wasn't doing. And I thought it was a loss of, who I was and my identity, but really it was, I wasn't practicing this thing or engaging in this thing that I had been
Which was
given.
your passion and your soul. It was one of your gifts that had served you in high school, but you had kind of abandoned in the face of providing for your family and having a career.
Exactly.
I love the idea that you just shared, and it was through a struggle and a loss that allowed you to circle back and reconnect with yourself first. And in that process, you thought, wait, I've set something down on the side of the road that I need to go back and pick back up, right?
Totally.
And so what did that awareness of needing to reconnect to what your passion was and what kind of makes you led to where you're at now?
Well, I think a big key part of that story is that I was unemployed for 3 months. Like, that was the greatest blessing for me. And I discovered that it was a great blessing for the people that I was around that were unemployed, because you work. And then when you stop and your life doesn't work out,
it is a huge
and you
identity
lose everything,
crisis.
It's an identity crisis, and you have to go, okay, am I what I'm doing right now, or can I be something so much
Is
more?
my worth and value my career only? Our family's gone through two different job losses. My father-in-law did as well, and my husband lost a job at the exact age as his dad did. And I would say that is one of the great gifts of really getting clear that your value on the planet is not your paycheck and not your career identity. And so then it allowed you to say what?
It just allowed me to piece things together. I realized that all these experiences that did and didn't work out were actually for my good, to help me discover what my divine potential was and what I was supposed to do and what I was supposed to give to myself and also give to the world. And that came back to this idea that as I was applying to a bunch of jobs, the thing that I discovered was not something you typically put on your resume. And it was, I have the ability to connect with anyone. And I felt like...
Which is a superpower, Dan.
I felt like it was. I wasn't sure if other people felt like it was, but I felt like for me it was.
I think it is too. And I'm similar in that I had friends in all of the different groups. The sports people, the academic people, and that is a superpower. That is, so especially
well, since you're saying it, I'll take it.
ReConnect podcast is naming Dan Davis the superhero of connection.
Do we need air quotes to solidify that? Like, what do we need to do to solidify that?
So you took this awareness and you monetized it.
I pieced it together and I said, okay, what do I want to do with my life? Well, if I have to work every day, I'm going to do something that allows me to enable my gift.
Meaningful contribution.
Full capacity, exactly. And so I pieced together an experience I had running a film production company with all these different roles I had running different companies and said, okay, what did I learn about leadership? What did I learn about film? What did I learn about storytelling, connection, all of those things? And that's what Stiry is. I just pieced all of those things together and said, Stiry is me. I want to give me to the world. And I also want to bring other people into Stiry so they can give them to the world and allow just this awesome forum of people to give whatever they've been blessed with as gifts in this life to the world. And the best way I could think of doing that was through video stories.
Okay, so for our listeners that are not, which I guess there might be 2 people left on the planet that don't know about Stiry.
I thought you were going to say 2 people left on the planet listening to this podcast. I hope there's more.
No, there's a million listening who don't know about your great content and the work that you're doing. What is it in a minute or two, and where do people find this, and how is it kind of different than what is already out there?
Yeah, well, we decided that, like I said, the best way to create connection was through video stories.
Real stories of real people, not fake ones. Like,
these are just...
I don't need to go to I love a movie that's a real story. I want to know you really did that. That changes me more than your made up superhero. See, Dan, the real superhero people. Is way more inspiring.
Once again, quote, superhero
exactly.
from Ganel-Lyn. No.
So people can find you.
Yeah, but all these people are superheroes. They have amazing stories, and they can find us at Stiry.com, on Facebook, facebook.com/Stiry. We're on Instagram as Stiry Official. They can just go and be inspired. We wanted to create a platform for them to just go and be inspired.
And the production quality is phenomenal. I mean,
thank you.
There's a lot of, you go to my Facebook page and my YouTube channel, it is not Stiry level production. It's my little cell phone, and whatever. So I love that not only is it produced well, and one of the main reasons I wanted to invite you on today is because I love your story of your why and how you went through a difficult time. And I know there are a lot of listeners out there that are maybe going through their own job loss right now, and they're going through an identity crisis, and they're trying to reevaluate what they bring to the planet and what's in line with that. But one of the other reasons, and I like at the ReConnect podcast that we give a piece of meat. Sorry for the vegetarians out there, but a takeaway, a tool. And the takeaway that I think you're perfectly equipped to teach us about is when it comes to connection, it's knowing each other's stories. But we were just saying not everyone is like you and I. I like to talk to strangers at the grocery store and find out their whole backstory by the time we get through the checkout line. Not everyone's comfortable with that. And then you get teenagers in your home, and they come home and say, yeah, I was fine today. I don't know. I don't know. Right. And there's
School
just
was good.
School was great. Nothing. Or your spouse. I've been married 27 years, and you can get into a rhythm where you're not really trying to get to know each other in new ways and have honest conversations. So what are some of your tips and tools for creating connection, especially when you're working with a client and you're helping tell their story, which people can contact you if they want to hire your company to tell their story. What do you do to get people to talk, and how do you help them kind of identify what their story is?
Yeah, it all comes down to you have to discover yourself first before you communicate it to the world. And that's what I did for myself. And that comes through reading a lot of good books. It comes through being around people that have discovered a lot of themselves and are continually seeking to find more of themselves and being proactive about that. And if you combine some of those elements, really a big part of my self-discovery had to do with my faith, combining that with faith and
we're God friendly here
and all that stuff.
At the ReConnect podcast.
Yeah, I mean, and if I wouldn't have started Stiry if it wasn't for my relationship with God and him helping me discover who I was supposed to be, who He saw me as. And I think that's the key is whether you're an individual or a company or a nonprofit, you have to discover who you're supposed to become first. And then you can start building those lasting connections with others. And that comes through some just grit is the word I use.
And tears.
And it's tough. Like I remember realizing I'm not an operational CEO. Like I had run all these different companies, and I'm like, I'm not very good at that.
It was shutting you down to show up in that space.
Yeah, it totally was.
Yeah.
Totally was.
So when you say surround yourself with other people, I love that idea, because I think oftentimes when we're in high school, we want to be friends with everyone, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you need those key people that are in your close space that are encouraging you to be authentic to yourself and celebrating that in you.
Yeah.
And I think you do that so brilliantly. So when you're meeting with someone and you're trying to get them to start putting their story on camera, which is scary and not always comfortable for people, what kinds of things do you say to them so they can kind of tune into what you said first, which is you got to know yourself if you want to connect with your spouse. Yeah. I think oftentimes, right, in family marriages, here's a little side note, it's so easy to go, well, my marriage would be better if my spouse would fill in the gap. My relationship with my kids would be great if they would try a little harder to pick up their socks or whatever. But I love your takeaway that you've offered our listeners, that start with you.
Totally.
What do you bring to the table that you can offer so that you create a space where they're safe to connect? But what do you do when you're with a client that's like, I don't know if I can go there. What do you say to them?
I think it's simple. I mean, we have something called perspective moments, and we describe that to them, and we describe that to anybody that's trying to discover their story. Your story is not a list of chronological events. I think that's the biggest fallacy when people say, I don't have a story. They just think, I don't have this list of chronological events that are just eye-opening and awe-inspiring. I say, find perspective moments. We actually sometimes give them a worksheet and say, I want you to go sit down and just think. And what a perspective moment is, it's a time that you felt inspired or discovered something or wanted to be more, and discovering what it was that sparked that, and then discovering what you felt you should do as a result. Wow. And so we have so many of those throughout our life, and we miss those. And so whether you're a company or an individual, you just need to sit down and actually discover those.
Wouldn't that be a great after-school question to ask your kid today?
Yeah.
What was a moment today where it felt like
you gained some perspective?
You gained some perspective, not how was your day? And you may have to ask that 10 times for them to start realizing, wait, mom and dad is going to keep asking that. Or your spouse. I mean, I often ask my husband, so how was your day? Oh, it was this or it was that, right? But did you get any new perspectives today about yourself? And maybe not every day feels that way. I mean, I do some days that are just the remote living instead of the
autopilot.
Yeah. But I think the mindfulness of that is that all of us, have an extraordinary story to tell, which is, I think, what your why is. And I think oftentimes we're in a world where the YouTubers or the viral video people are this like amazing, we went into this fire, there was an earthquake, we rescued the dog, and the rest of us are like, I went to Walmart.
In my pajamas.
Dan's been following me. The lady at Walmart last week was like, I was showered and I had makeup on, and she was like double take because she was like, wait, are you the same lady that I always see? You look so showered, you know? So I love that idea. I love that idea of first starting with yourself and spending some time alone. What are some of the things you do to stay grounded in that so that you don't have to go through an unemployment period?
Yeah.
So that you don't lose that again in the goodness of Stiry and being a dad and being a husband? What are you doing every day to stay connected to yourself?
I think every day is the key. And I'm not 100% at it, and I think it's okay to
it's
not
a practice
be 100%.
to circle back, right?
Yeah, but the biggest thing is I always start with my faith, and that's the biggest thing. Is so I listen to people that I respect in my faith, and that help inspire me to become more like God and discover myself more. And that could be through scriptures or through talks or speeches or whatever that may be. And stories is a big part of that inspires me. And then I actually spend time reading books or listening to books every morning that are people that are here on this planet. They're everyday people that have discovered their story.
Podcasters.
And so it could be, I could listen to a podcast, I could read a book or listen to a book. And I that helps me. And honestly, a lot of the inspiration comes from business books designed for self-help. And they're very non-traditional self-help books, but they're very inspiring to me because I think business is a lot like life.
I'm reading one right now, Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. It's a new one.
Yeah, I've heard it's
and
great.
I love it is great because if you haven't read Braving the Wilderness and Daring Greatly and The Gifts of Imperfection, she's kind of put it within the business model. So I can share it with my husband and he's like tuned in, but she layers it with all of the others. So I think that's great. And I don't know if you feel this, not to put words in your mouth, but I have found that reading scripture, which are stories, right, to inspire, listening to inspirational, maybe religious leaders or business leaders, all of those things are great. It's usually not, and when I do speaking, it's not what I'm saying that I'm hoping inspires. It's that I'm saying something that then sparks the individual application. And
that's a perspective moment. That's all that is.
Because very rarely do I listen to something or read something and go, okay, I'm going to exactly copy and paste that into my life. Most of the time I listen to it and my brain goes in a totally different direction, but it's God's way of saying to me, listen, this is how you're going to add value to the planet. Thank you, Dan, for the work you're doing with Stiry. Thank you for powering this podcast. It's a great space to be in. This studio has the energy that you have intentionally brought to the planet with the work that you're doing. I'm grateful to call you a friend and a superhero. And I love the takeaway of start with connection with yourself, and then it will allow you to reconnect with the work you're doing, a meaningful work that you're doing, and with your family. And thank you again for joining us at the ReConnect podcast, sponsored by the Anasazi Foundation and powered by Stiry. Thank you so much, and join us next week for more ideas on reconnecting with yourself and with your family.
Thank you for listening to the ReConnect podcast, sponsored by Anasazi Foundation. Anasazi Foundation is a wilderness therapy program for at-risk youth, and our mission is to help strengthen families. To learn more about us, please visit anasazi.org. And if you like this show, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Thank you again.